left off in the end of Genesis, we have this family that started from a guy who's sort of just vagabond, nomad, traveling, Abram and his wife, childless, to now they have this big family. They are now living in Egypt, and things are good, and there's plenty of food, and there's all this blessing because Joseph, this descendant of Abraham, has been given this authority in the land and all that. He's able to look after and take care of all of his extended family and all of that. And everything's going great, except we still haven't dealt with the big problem that was introduced in Genesis chapter 3, which is, humans are still running around with all the intent of their heart from youth is evil, and just spilling that evil and death and just curse is just continuing to propagate on the planet. And we've been told to wait and watch for a unique baby boy that's going to be born, who is going to rescue all of humanity from the evil that has hijacked this world that was intended to be good. And so that hasn't happened yet, but we have this family, and we know that this savior figure is going to come, this champion is going to come from this family. And so we're sort of waiting around for that person to show up. But it certainly looks like the stage has been set, right? Because now they've got, a foothold and this one of the biggest, baddest, most powerful kingdoms on the earth at this time. And so maybe from that, somebody's going to rise up. That's what we have been primed as readers to wait and watch and expect. And so that brings us to the story of Exodus. And so, it starts off with, these are the names of the sons, and you're just like, whoa, this is boring. Why does this matter in the story? But it's just explaining to us, okay, it's following that lineage, right? Because, okay, one of these sons, right, has to be the special son that God is going to use to vanquish sin and death. And, obviously it wasn't Isaac, and it wasn't Jacob, and, it wasn't any of Jacob's sons, but maybe one of their sons will be the one. And so you're watching that. In the meantime, what does it say about the children of Israel? It says that they were, in verse 7 of chapter 1, the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now, does that sound a whole lot like Genesis 1:28? Yes, it does. So it's like, okay, that blessing, look, the fulfillment. So now do we have the one who will help us to reign, to subdue the earth properly under the submission of God's wisdom? Is that person going to show up now? But then we have immediately this other character that shows up in the story. It says, there arose a new king over Egypt, in verse 8, who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if a war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. So right off the bat, what kind of character in this story? If we've been tracking with Genesis and we've been kind of trained to look for certain patterns, certain language that is indicative about how we should think about these characters as we're reading the story, what are the things that should pop into our mind regarding this guy Pharaoh? Well, number one, he talks about him. He wants to deal shrewdly. That seems very serpent-like. Is he sort of think right off the bat, this guy is another descendant of the snake. He's another guy, and obviously because he wants to oppose and persecute the descendants, the children of Israel. Well, that makes sense. That whole goes back to that second poem in the Bible where it's talking about the seed of the woman and the seed of the snake. There's going to be enmity between them. Okay, this is part of that. All right, that makes sense. All right, and look at don't miss out on this. What Pharaoh is afraid of, the reason, what prompts him, his motive for going after and oppressing the children of Israel is he's afraid that they're going to do what? He's afraid that if war breaks out, between Egypt and another power, the children of Israel are going to side with the enemy of Egypt and are going to leave the land. That's exactly what happens. Like, sorry, I'm spoiling the story, but that's exactly what happens. Only it's not another nation that goes to war with Egypt. It's the God of Israel who shows up in the story again and makes war upon Egypt. The children of Israel side with God and end up leaving the land. Like, this becomes the thing that prompts Pharaoh to unleash this. I mean, we're going to see just horrible, evil stuff upon the children of Israel, is the very thing that happens anyway. The thing he did all this evil to try to prevent was actually not able to prevent it at all. And exactly what he didn't want to happen is exactly what happens. And so we see also just sort of the fruit of the tree of knowledge or discernment of good and evil, the literal fruit of that in Pharaoh and what he does next. So, they set taskmasters over the people, they're enslaving them. And it talks about, this is one of those things where it's like, oh, that's a little detail, that doesn't matter. It says in chapter 1, verse 14, he made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in all kinds of work in the field. And in all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. And you think, why does that matter? It's just a silly little detail. Nothing's a silly little detail in the Bible. So I didn't point this out at the time we were going through Genesis, but if you go to Genesis 11, there's another spot where this little detail pops up, and at the time when you read it the first time, you probably thought, whatever, that doesn't matter. So Genesis chapter 11, verse 3. So they've decided that humanity has decided, hey, let's do the opposite of what God said. Let's not scatter, let's gather and build ourselves up, build up a big city for ourselves, build up a big tower and make our name, redefine our own identity and make it great. And they say in verse 3 of chapter 11 of Genesis, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower at its top in the heavens and make a name for ourselves," etc., etc. Brick and mortar. At the time you thought, okay, yeah, that makes sense, right? That was the invention of the technology of bricks, right? And when you think about it, why are bricks significant? Because before that, they would heap stones together and all of that, and like baking bricks and making them all together. I mean, they could just mass produce bricks. It was a way in the ancient times to build things, big things, really, really fast and efficiently. And so it was smart technology. And you just might think when you're reading that, oh, it's just like another little archaeological treasure in the Bible. But if you ever do a word search in the Bible on brick and mortar appearing in the same sentence, there's only 2 places in the entire Bible where these things show up, and it's in Genesis 11 and Exodus 1. It's not an accident. So where in Genesis 11, they were making bricks and mortars to build a particular city, not just any city. They were building Babylon. That was the city. That was the city that they were scattered from. That was the city that Abram and his family were called out of, to go west, to go into this land that God was going to show them. It was out of Babylon that he was called. And Babylon was all about, what does Babylon represent in the story? It represents human evil gathering together, united in rebellion against God. And the capacity that has when that happens to just unleash evil at a scale unmanageable, and one that God wants to shut down immediately. And so we associate that in the story in our minds with this idea of brick and mortar, because in all of Genesis, that's the only time brick and mortar is mentioned. So anytime you hear brick and mortar, if you've been saturating yourself in the Hebrew Bible, like you start reading Exodus, you immediately think, I'm imagining Babylon. But wait, they're in Egypt. Right, because at this point in the story, Egypt may be geographically not the same place as Iraq, but spiritually, it's the same. Its essence is the same. Its character is the same. And as we're about to see, like in the story, like it is just human evil unleashed at just an unprecedented scale. Because they've taken this capacity to define good and evil for themselves and run with it in so far the opposite direction of God's wisdom and God's definition of good and evil, that they've reached the point where Pharaoh can look his people in the eye and say that the mass killing of babies could be a good thing. That's how far they've twisted real good and evil for themselves, is he can look and say, you know what? The best thing we can do, these people are getting too numerous. It's just not good for our country and for our nation to have this many Hebrews running around. So we're gonna massacre every firstborn male of the Hebrew people. And this is a good thing for us. I mean, horrible. I mean, baby killing at a huge scale, they're calling good. This is Babylon. They're back in Babylon. This is the place that God called Abram out of, and now his descendants, who are the promise-carrying people, the blessing-carrying people, through who are to be a blessing, and through all the families of the earth are going to be blessed, are now back in Babylon, and they're enslaved to it. They're actual slaves. They can't even leave. Now more than ever, we are looking, as readers of the story, for the Messiah figure to show up. And so when we get to Exodus chapter 2 and the birth of Moses, like, we are pumped now. Okay, this is the guy. This is the guy. He's miraculously saved from death at his birth through the intervention, just the shrewdness of his family and his sister. His name means deliverer, essentially. And so, like, oh, right, this is the Messiah. Like, hands down, like, this is the first time reading the Bible. Like, that's what you're primed to think. Like, this guy's gonna be great. And look at God, like, wow, he uses the mechanisms of the enemy. Once again, like what we learned in Genesis is totally at play at the beginning of Exodus, because God has the household of Pharaoh raise up Moses, raise up this obviously chosen one of the children of Israel who's gonna defeat the snake and all of that. And he gets like the finest education in Egypt and all of these luxuries. And he gets to grow up like a prince of Egypt. Somebody should make a movie about that. And that's how we're primed to see him. And obviously he's had gotten, because he still has a relationship and a connection to his Hebrew family, like he obviously knows that there's some expectation and anticipation riding on him. And so when he sees a fellow Hebrew slave being beaten by an Egyptian taskmaster, he's like, all right, this is the time. I can't stand this anymore. I'm gonna jump in, I'm gonna intervene, I'm gonna rescue my people, I'm gonna be this messianic figure. And he murders the Egyptian and buries his body so that nobody finds out what he did. And he thinks that this is gonna be like the first act of rebellion, and he's gonna lead a slave revolt or something. Like, obviously he's expecting, like, he's gonna win a lot of points with his own people. Instead, when he sees the very guy, that he rescued, like, he's totally rejected by his people, and he's just seen as a murderer. He's seen as no different than the evil power that he's enjoyed the privilege of all his life thus far growing up. And you're thinking, oh, well, that's a bummer. Like, so he's not the guy. So like, what is the point then? What is God gonna do? And it's just so sad, because he ends up having to leave his home and run away, because he's worried he's gonna be found out that he murdered this guy. And so now he's fleeing Egypt. He's running off essentially into exile. And you think, well, this man, all the cards are stacked against this poor family, this messed up family. And even the people that seem like they're the ones that should be the heroes, don't seem to be acting like heroes. And so Moses ends up in the wilderness, and he meets his wife at a well. Well, here's that same pattern again. You're meant to ponder, what's the connection with Jacob and Isaac and now Moses and all this, and women and wells and marriage? Like, what is with that? Ponder that. He meets his wife, he gets married, he's working for his father-in-law, sounds a lot like Jacob, and tending sheep and all of that. And he's sort of back to his ancestral roots of just living in the land and taking care of animals. And then something happens. God shows up in the story in an unprecedented way. He sees a burning bush, and probably all familiar with that story. And in Exodus 3, God shows up and introduces himself as being the God of his ancestors. And Moses is freaking out, and as I'm sure we all would be, to see this burning bush and to hear this voice and to recognize that we need to immediately take our sandals off, because this is now sacred, holy, set apart ground, because God is manifesting here in a unique way. And Moses asks, like, God gives this commission to Moses. Like, Moses, I'm sure, thinks he's a failure at this point. Like, he totally blew it. Like, he had a chance. He was in the right position and all of this, and he just totally blew his destiny and whatever God had planned for him and his role in being a rescuer for his people. And God's like, no, yeah, it's no problem. I can totally work with you exactly how you are. And in fact, I'm going to send you back. I'm going to send you right back to where you ran away from. And I'm going to empower you to speak for me. And you're going to tell the most powerful and evil human on the face of the planet, who's basically the serpent personified in authoritative form on planet Earth. And you're going to tell him that he's going to let my people go, because I'm the one who's asking. And of course, Moses has an exchange with God, but who are you? And I don't really know you, and I don't even know your name. And God gives him his name. He says that he says, Ihya Asher Ihya. He says, I am that I am. And you're going to tell him, Yahweh, he is, has sent you. And you can do, there's lots of studies that have been done on Yahweh. It's been pronounced in the past as Jehovah, and like what that means. And it's not the best of my own study of it is it's not a real Hebrew word, but it seems to be an amalgamation, a combination of the verb to be in like past, present, and future tense, like all mashed together. It's like God's saying that his identity is that he is who he has always been and will continue to be who he has always been, and that there's even a sense that he is the originator of everything that is, everything of reality, that he is reality. He is the real, and all realness comes from him. It's like all of these ideas and concepts are all wrapped up in this name, and I don't know if that's what the answer that Moses was expecting, but God gives him this, like it's a very personal thing of God, like extending like relationship to Moses before sending him out. And of course, even that's not enough for Moses. And Moses goes down, his own laundry list of all his disqualifications for this assignment from God. And ultimately God's like, you're going to do it, because it's not all on your shoulders. It's actually all on my shoulders, but I'm asking you to partner with me. And so he sends Moses back, and there's some, Moses is very hesitant for this assignment, to put it lightly. And his return back to Egypt, there's all these things that sort of happen along the way, and kind of excuses that Moses makes. He wants to go and bring his family with him and needs to take time to do that, and all of that. And but God is so deadly serious about this, and he sends Moses in there, and he makes this. They have this confrontation with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's like, forget it. I don't know your God. Who's Yahweh? I've never heard of him. And, forget it and get lost. And he sort of throws the gauntlet down, like, if your God's so powerful, let's see what he can do. And it's actually in Genesis 6 that, God shows up, and we have the first time in the Hebrew Bible where the word redeem, redemption, shows up in the story. And one of the keys that I've learned in studying the Hebrew Bible is that the authors, literary masters, brilliant, articulate, they know their language and how to use it to maximum impact. And they intentionally, it seems to me, like reserve using certain words until a certain point in the story where they can really show you what that word means. They want to define, they want the first time that you see a new word in the story to be a sort of a definitive moment of the word, of that concept, it's going to shape your understanding. So every time you see that word again in the future, you're going to think back to this moment in the story when the word was first used. And so the first time that we see redemption is in verse 6 of chapter 6. Say therefore to the people of Israel, I am the Lord, I am Yahweh, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from slavery to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment. And so what that Hebrew word, Gaal, means, the redemption, it literally means like to basically purchase or make provision for the liberty of someone who is in slavery. It's to buy or purchase out from under slavery another human being. And God's saying, you're in slavery and I'm going to provide what is necessary to get you out from slavery. Now, what is that thing that God's going to provide? Like, we're going to find out in the story. Like, that'll come out. But this is the first time. So this is why whenever then you see the word redeem or redemption in the Bible, to the people that were reading it and the people that were listening to these stories, whenever they heard redemption, they'd always think back to this act, to this story. This is the definitive picture of what redemption looks like. It looks like God showing up to a whole nation of people that are totally enslaved and helpless, and providing what is necessary, providing what is needed to get them out of that slavery and to purchase their freedom. That's what redemption is. And so then we have this crazy back and forth. And when you're reading this, like, again, modern day readers, like, some of the stuff is just brutal, like the amount of destruction, because Pharaoh, with all the might and power of Egypt and proclivity for human evil in his heart, makes war against the God of Moses, against Yahweh. And he's like, the gloves are off. And God, goes back and forth with Pharaoh with his own gloves off and just unleashing what we call the 10 plagues. And it's just increasing amounts of destruction and death, and it can be hard to read. Like, as we're reading this as 21st century readers, like, wow, like, that seems really extreme. Like, is that really necessary? And one of the points that is going to be made throughout the Torah and throughout the scriptures is that this is exactly what human evil produces. And when it's just like with Babel, and again, like that connection is so strong between Egypt and Babel/Babylon, that when human evil is so out of control, and even back with Noah in the time of the flood, like when human evil is just totally out of control, totally running wild, like God will always do what is necessary to shut that down, even if that might seem to us like it's an extreme thing. Now, at the same time, God will always provide a way out. He always provides a way out, even for those who have made themselves his enemy. But for those who don't choose to accept his offer, like this is the judgment that they have asked for. Like when you again, it goes back to the tree and good and evil, tree of life, all of that. That the idea that God is the author of life and the source of our life, and therefore when we turn against him, when we go to war with him, when we cut ourselves off completely from him and from the identity that he wants for us, we are going to war with life itself, and we were choosing death for ourselves, whether as individuals or as whole nations and societies. We are choosing death, and God gives us in the end what we ask for. But he constantly is pleading with us to choose another way, to surrender to him, and to receive life in place of death. That's always God's first choice. But ultimately, he allows us to receive the thing that we ask for, even if it kills us. And that's exactly what goes back and forth here with Pharaoh in Egypt and with the God of Moses, is he continues to unleash increasing destruction and death. And there are also signs, and you may have read somewhere that a lot of these things with attacking the Nile and the thing with insects and frogs and all that, these were important symbols in Egyptian culture, and that there were gods and powers, spiritual powers, that were associated with all of these things that the Egyptians interacted with or worshipped in various levels. And it was almost as if God, through these different plagues, is basically saying, I'm supreme to all of these. You can worship all the little gods you want. You can sacrifice to whatever spiritual force of darkness you want. I'm still the only real God, and I trump all of that. And just as I had no rivals and no one to gainsay, to speak against me, to compete with me in Genesis 1, as I brought light into darkness and life where there was death and blessing where there was curse, just as I was able to do that, I can do that here without any competition whatsoever. What are the Israelites doing during this whole time? As their redemption is being battled for, they're doing nothing. Like, they're just sitting back and watching, just like their great-great-great-great-grandfather Abraham. They're watching God's promises come true before their eyes. And they have zero part to add to what God is doing. You know, even Moses, I mean, he's just speaking for God, and there's certain acts of faith that God, for him and his brother Aaron, who comes into the story, because, you know, you see as you read it, you know, Moses, like a lot of us, did not like the pressure of having to bear all this alone, and so God brings his brother alongside him to help him. But you know, they have certain prophetic actions that they take on behalf of God, but it's all God's power. I mean, what power does a stick or a staff have to change a river into blood, or to turn into snake, or any of those things? It's like God's just doing all of it. All God's people are doing are obeying his voice and his instruction, whatever those might be. And most of the time it's nothing. Most of the time it's just trust me. Sit back and trust me. And so that's what's happening here. And so it finally culminates, and it's a wild deal, because you have all these plagues coming, and it's leading up to the 10th plague, the ultimate plague. And and that plague is exactly the thing. It's like Egypt is being paid back exactly what was done, what they did to the children of Israel. They massacred the firstborn sons of all the families of Israel, and now God is going to take away all of their firstborn sons. And just like, whoa, that's extreme, and what's that going to look like, and all of that.